Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 2019 commemoration of Law Day. My name is Jane Sánchez, and I have the honor of serving as the 25th Law Librarian of Congress. Law Day is a national day to celebrate the rule of law and its contributions to the freedoms that we Americans enjoy. A day aimed to promote and remind everyone that we should appreciate the liberties and cultivate respect for law, which is vital to our democratic way of life. In 1958, at the urging of Charles Rhine, who was then president of the American Bar Association, Law Day was first proclaimed by President Dwight Eisenhower to recognize our country's great heritage of liberty, justice, and equality under law. In his proclamation, President Eisenhower especially urged the legal profession to take a leading role in promoting and participating in this observance. In 1961, Congress, by joint resolution, officially designated May 1st for the celebration of Law Day. So every year throughout May, the legal community reaches out to communities across the nation to stimulate appreciation and critical thinking about the founding fundamentals that so easily can be taken for granted. This event is our small contribution to that tradition. We are very pleased to have with us today Bob Carlson, current president of the American Bar Association, the world's largest voluntary professional organization. Bob, welcome to the Library of Congress, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jane. Appreciate it.
So just a little bit about Bob, and I'm sure he's going to blush right now, but Bob is a shareholder of Corrette, Black, Carlson, and Mickelson, P.C., a law firm in Butte, Montana. He has served in many national and state bar leadership positions, including as president of the State Bar of Montana and chair of the ABA's policymaking House of Delegates. He's also served 2 terms on the ABA Board of Governors and its executive committee, and in the ABA House of Delegates as both Montana's State Bar delegate and as a delegate at large. He's a Life Patron Fellow and past state chair of the Fellows of the American Bar Foundation and was a member of the Executive Council of the National Conference of Bar Presidents. Bob's other professional affiliations include International Association of Defense Counsel, Defense Research Institute, Montana Defense Trial Lawyers Association, and former board member of Montana Justice Foundation. Before entering private practice, Bob was staff attorney for Montana Department of Business Regulation and a law clerk for the Montana Supreme Court. He earned his BA with honors from the University of Montana and his JD from the University of Montana School of Law. Before we start, I just wanted to mention that we are allowing some time after I ask some questions for your comments and your questions. So please be prepared to ask questions. And I encourage you to use this opportunity to jump into the conversation. So let's move on to the first question. The theme for this year's Law Day is free speech, free press, free society. Freedom of speech, of press, association, assembly, and petition. This set of guarantees protected by the First Amendment comprises what we refer to as freedom of expression. Without it, our other fundamental rights would wither and die. But in spite of this preferred position in our constitutional hierarchy, the nation's commitment to freedom of expression has been tested over and over again. So Bob, what do you believe are the limits on free speech in a democratic society?
Well, the limits are to a certain extent, what the public is going to permit. The Constitution says that no government may abridge those basic rights, whether it's speech or a free press. And that doesn't make it limitless, but it certainly puts a heavy burden on the government to try to restrain that speech. Certainly, it's not limitless because you can't, as we all know, go into a crowded room or a crowded theater and yell fire. That's potential for public harm outweighs that person's right to exercise what some would call free speech. There are authors over time and judges that have argued that it's broad, and there's popular slogans and t-shirts, what part about may not abridge do you not understand? But there are limits, and the limits are generally that you can't defame somebody without a cost. You can say that if you want. We're not going to prohibit you, but if you make a false statement against somebody, you will be held accountable. If you make a false representation about a product you sell, you will be in some form or fashion held accountable. It's not limitless, but it's critically important, and it's more important, I think, both here and around the world than really it has been in a long time. We have so much power in the palm of our hands to do and say things, really to a certain extent, in anonymity. And we need to come to grasp with what's appropriate. And so the best way to do that is to have people who hear conversations, people who don't agree with something, people who are listening to somebody make comments, make remarks. It's not to shut up. It's not to politely look away. It's to say, listen, that's not appropriate in this setting. And we can't sit on our hands. We can't expect anybody else to defend those rights for us. It's also not appropriate everybody can complain and say, I didn't get a fair shake, the story wasn't accurate. But when you argue that members of the press are traitors to this country, when you argue that there's some treasonous impact, those things take hold in part because, frankly, not everybody pays attention to what those words in the Constitution say as much as they used to. And that sort of populist movement, both here and abroad, is really something that we need to start dealing with every day. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. While the text and the principle of the First Amendment have not changed over time, courts' interpretations have indeed changed. Judges, lawmakers, and scholars sometimes struggle with balancing strong speech protections with the necessity of maintaining a peaceful society. So what are your thoughts about this? For example, what do you think of the changing interpretations? More importantly, how do we appropriately protect even unpopular or hurtful speech?
Well, I think if you're talking about government intrusion, I think we have to protect it. I think just because somebody says something that you may not agree with or I might not agree with doesn't mean that it should be prohibited just because it makes you uncomfortable. Your role, as I said earlier, is to speak out on your own and sort of drown that voice out. So the more people that are talking about cooperation and collaboration and getting along the less people are going to listen to that one person yelling, whether it's an anti-religious slogan, a racial slur, or whatever. They are going to not listen. That person is going to literally be the lone wolf crying in the wilderness. And it takes a society that's committed to that, committed to saying, listen, I might not agree with what you have to say, but you have the right to say it. But there are certain limitations on how you do that and certain ways to go about it, and you can't turn that into a threat. So there's a fine line sometimes between hate speech and threatening violent acts. One thing is probably protected. The other, the violent act, the incite to riot, the incite to take action, that's not protected. So there, I think that's where the line is coming, and it's getting tougher in part because The Constitution was written 200 and some years ago, and when they talked about a free press, I mean, that's literally, they were talking about, a solid building where printing presses were operating, putting out a newspaper or putting out a magazine. Today, we all, if you reach into your pockets, you all have a printing press like in the palm of your hand. And how do you deal with that? Government shouldn't really control that unless there's some violent threat there. But in terms of who controls what you say on this, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or whatever, you've signed a contract just to get on that page. You signed a contract with those private businesses. And they do have a right under the contract to control what you say. You also, as a listener to this, you have a right to turn it off, or you have a right to fact check it, or you have a right to speak out against it and disagree. That's what the marketplace of ideas allows us to do. It's a free and open marketplace, and certain voices need to be louder.
Okay. Let's move on to freedom of the press. Is there a difference between freedom of speech and freedom for the press?
Well, going back to the original derivation, there was, I think, some in the author's mind, it was important that an individual could stand up and speak against the government, but it was also important that there was an organized group, a business enterprise, if you will. And I think it was President John Kennedy that said, the press is the only business enterprise that's specifically guaranteed in the Constitution. And I think in their minds, there was a difference. And I think there is still a difference, because I think we still need to, those lone voices or the collective voices still need to look at an organized press that is providing us with facts so we can make decisions. An organized press that is standing up, speaking truth to power. You need that collective group. You need that organized presence there to protect the individuals who are speaking. Constitutionally, legally, I don't think they're treated that much differently. But it's certainly different taking on, for instance, the New York Times or Fox or CNN or any major outlet versus saying to some person on the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court who's yelling at something. It's a heck of a lot easier to control that, because that person's bandwidth, if you will, is however far his voice will carry. The press has a very clear role to play in protecting this democracy, and they need to do their job. They need to do it right. They need to make sure that they call out instances of fake news. They need to make sure that they check their facts, and that there is a clear line between, which is these days sometimes blurred, a clear line between the factual portion of the newspaper and the editorial page.
Okay. Does a free media mean a free society? How do they intersect?
It would be nice if it was that simple. That's a tough one, because there is an intersection point. You need a free press to protect society's freedoms. But just having a free press doesn't completely protect that. You need other ramifications. You need other things to protect it. You need people protecting your due process rights and your property rights and a whole host of other things. But having that as the sort of the backbone or the beacon, if you will, that's going to shine the light, the spotlight on what's actions, good or bad, you definitely need that to keep a society free. Will it do so by itself? No, because I think that needs all of us agreeing to have that faith that we are going to not believe everything as I used to say, everything we read in the newspaper. Now we have to broaden it, everything we read on Facebook or everything we read or hear on a major 24-hour news channel. We need to check it out. We need to think about it. And we need to be open to the possibility that other views might have some basis, and we need to figure out how to get divergent views to sort of cross and sort of figure out a way to meet in the middle so we can move this country forward.
Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, so I apologize. Many feel more free to say or post whatever they want on social media. And they believe they are safe in doing so. Their perception is that the First Amendment protects them no matter what. How do free speech and social media fit together?
Well, the simple answer and the really short answer is they fit perfectly together. You should be allowed to express your views regardless of whether or not anybody agrees with them. You should be able to express them if everybody agrees with them. The question is, what is your right on a social media platform? That's pretty much ends up being a contract right between you and Facebook or you and whoever owns that platform, and that you sign that very long consent agreement, which I'm sure one person in the room, maybe two, have read. I have a friend back in Montana who reads every single one of them, and I don't know how he has time to do anything in his life, because those things go on a long time. But most people just automatically hit that button. So it might not be a bad idea to start there, is before you hit that button, you might take a little bit of time and at least skim through to see what it is that you're actually agreeing to. Frankly, you're agreeing that they can take something down if they don't agree with it.
Right.
Now that has some other issues. We all want to think about it in terms of, well, it's going to protect us from hate speech. It's going to protect us from being somebody trying to incite violence, somebody trying to do something that we in a civil society don't agree with. But it can also be used to control what gets on. It can be used to control a message. So what message do I want you to get? And how am I going to make sure it's effective? And the data analytics now allow you to figure out where you've been on Facebook, what things you've liked, so what are your interests? And try to gear a message that's to you. And it may sound like it's coming from a source you can trust. But that's where you all come in again. You have to figure out, is it a source that I can trust? Because there's a lot of information, there's way too much information out there for the average person to process by themselves. So there are companies that are very reliable that do check things out. And you need to take the time before you start sending something. We've all seen, something, this whatever, romantic story or whatever, and it's just all fake, right? Or somebody trying to help a stranger, and everybody walks by, this one person does, and the whole, I hope it happens more, but most of these are just to tug at your heartstrings, and they're not actually fact. It gets more complicated when you're in a situation where it's politics at play, whether it's a celebrated court case or something that's going on, and you're getting a message that tells you what you want to hear. That really isn't a free press either. That really isn't necessarily free speech. That's trying to control what you think. And sometimes we let them do that. So back again, these freedoms, we have to fight. It was interesting, I had a conversation, it was more about an independent judiciary, but I think it's applicable here, with somebody from a foreign country about 6 months ago. And the comment was that, in 2003, we established an independent judiciary, and we established this, and we had this constitution that protected speech and press. And then we went back to doing the business. We were trying to fix our economy. We were trying to do all these other things, and we got distracted from that moment. And we weren't fighting every day for free speech and an independent judiciary. And now we're in trouble. And the person looks to me across the table, and I'm not sure exactly what I'm supposed to say, but something comes to me, and I don't know if it's good, bad, or indifferent, but here's what it was. Listen, we've been at this for over 225 years. We fight every day. And we don't take weekends and Sundays off. when it comes to protecting those values. So that's incumbent on all of us to sit there and think about that and make sure that we get this right. This is a great experiment in democracy, but it only goes so far as what the people in this room are willing to sacrifice for it.
Okay. So, do you have any other thoughts about this year's theme of free speech, free press, free society? We wanted to give you an opportunity to just take this where you would like.
A couple. So, and I've sort of woven it into some of the remarks already, but this country is really a unique place to live, and we really have a great tradition of recognizing in our Constitution the importance of free speech and free press. And when we were thinking about picking a topic for this year, one of the purposes of Law Day is to educate. It's not to necessarily stay on the topics that are easy, stay on topics that don't engender some debate and discussion. And it just came to us that this was the perfect time to have this discussion. It was the perfect time to remind people of the importance of civil discussion and the importance of civil debate and the importance of being able to accept that you may not always be right and that the world's not always going to agree with you. And that's fine. It may be just that the other person's point of view or the other person's, not spin, but the other person's feeling about something are actually right. And you can only do that if you have somebody pointing the facts out. People should believe the news media. They should believe what's printed as fact. They should check it, but they should have some ability to have faith in that. I'm a big sports fan. I'm a big baseball fan. And, every newspaper and every magazine has typographical errors. But when I look at the box score, from a reputable newspaper, I believe that, Gary Sánchez went 2 for 4 and had a home run and 2 RBIs. And the score is what the score is. We actually need to get back to that our press, who has an obligation too in this role, that they are trusted. I think we have a lot of good journalists, a lot of good newspaper people, and a lot of good people who are willing to dig the facts out. So we have to find those folks and be able to trust and listen to what they're saying. That faith in the system is very important. It's gotten us this far. Is it going to continue? That's up to us. From an association standpoint, since I am the president of and speak for most of the lawyers in this country, my thought is this: it's up to us to help fight, but it's up to the media, it's up to journalists to participate in that, because that First Amendment protects everybody, and we need both the legal institution and the institution of a free press to work together to, when necessary, speak truth to power, when necessary, make sure we get it right. So this is a great exercise. Thank you for hosting. Thanks for your hospitality, and I appreciate your sometimes not so easy questions. But thank you.
You're welcome. So now the true test comes. We're going to open up questions to the audience. Who do we have? Right here in front. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, why don't you go ahead?
You have the microphone.
Yeah.
Thank you for this interesting discussion. In your comments, you suggest that the press has protected status. If so, who makes that designation, and what criteria should they use for making that designation?
Well, first of all, the Constitution protects them. Make no law that shall abridge. The government shall make no law that shall abridge the freedom of speech of the free press. So they have an inherent protection in the Constitution. What they do with that sort of answers your question. Are they trustworthy? Have they shown, has a particular newspaper, has a particular TV station, has a particular author shown that they are what they say they are? Facts are facts. There's really isn't too many ways you can slice, Gary Sánchez hits home run, there's 2 people on base, that's 3 runs. You can't, that's a fact, okay? It's the blurring, what creates the problem in my mind is the blurring between my spin on those facts or my opinions. And there's an editorial page, an opinion page in newspapers and magazines and on TV for a reason. When you're reporting something as fact that is an opinion, that's really just an opinion, that's where the problem is. And it's not up to the government, because the government's precluded. It's up to the people to make that decision. It's up to them to say, okay, I don't agree with you, and I'm not going to continue to spin this out on Facebook. I'm not going to link this in 2 thumbs up or whatever. I don't do Facebook, so whatever emojis there are. It's not, it's up to you to get to the bottom line and maybe post a comment that says, I checked, and this just isn't accurate.
That's not quite my question.
Okay, sorry.
Who is the press? Is WikiLeaks press? And are they?
Okay. So
in
today,
this modern
just about
era, you don't have to have a printing press. Is I think the challenge we're facing.
Today, I'm not sure that WikiLeaks. I don't know how you would define them because they do the dictionary thing, they do the biography thing, they do a variety of things. The question is what is their purpose and what are they trying to do? As an organized group, if they are publishing things that they put out in the public field that are facts, that are supposedly fact-based, and they're arguing that those are fact-based, they may very well fall into the protection of the press. But the press isn't completely protected from a private citizen filing a lawsuit saying you defamed me, you went beyond what's protected speech, you lied about me, it ruined my reputation. So there are those controls over it. But today I agree with you, the lines are blurred in terms of is a blogger, is that part of the press? So the evolution is not done yet, but I think that if you are posting something that's opinion-based, solely opinion-based, then you're going to have to be responsible for the ramifications of what that opinion is. If you're truly, there's a place for that in the media, but there's really more of a place for facts and investigative facts and telling us what's happening, reporting the news, telling us there's a storm coming, telling whether it's natural or man-made. That's the real role that I see. That's, I think, what the Constitution was looking at. They certainly didn't foresee 200 and some years later that we would have all this technological abilities. So that's an evolving process, but I think it all still comes back to the individual, the purchaser of that information, whether you pay for it or not. You're actually paying for it because you're giving your time, which is valuable, to something. You want to make sure you're getting the facts so you can make a decision.
We had a question right up here in front, right here.
Hi. Presidential criticism of the press are generally portrayed as undermining the First Amendment. I'm wondering if the office of the president itself, as a constitutional office, has free speech rights under the First Amendment, and if so, is not criticism of, the institutional press simply an exercise of protected speech?
Well, first of all, criticism, just to be clear, criticism is not a bad thing. Criticism of government, criticism of the press, you didn't get your facts right, I don't agree with you, I don't agree with your philosophy, is one thing. Accusing a member of the press or the press of being enemies of the state or traitors, that's a different story. And if you're using a constitutional office to make that point, then you go back to, can the government create any laws or any restrictions on that constitutional right? Now, it says no, Congress may not, an institution of government, I think, has a hard time, if they're acting as that institution, constitutionally based institution of government, that's a different story than I'm the president and I don't agree with what you're saying. Presidents have disagreed and fought with the press. They've commented on judicial decisions forever in this country. That's fine. That's part of the process. That's part of the give and take of the marketplace. But the line has to be drawn when acting as governor or president, you basically call somebody an enemy of the state for exercising a constitutional right. That is a problem. And that has consequences. That has downstream consequences that incite people to violence. Maybe not intended, but in this society, we've seen plenty of examples over the last 20 years of something said, something by a powerful person, both here and around the world, that has led to direct attacks on people's lives. There is a line there that needs to be carefully followed.
Over here.
Thank you for your very interesting remarks, and I absolutely agree with you that press has obligation to provide information, that people should believe information they read in mass media. But what can be done if media is used by a government to provide influence, or sometimes it becomes a tool of propaganda? For example, now in this city, it is ongoing discussion what to do with Russia Today media outlets. Are they really performing journalistic work, or should they be registered as foreign agents? France, for example, recently passed a special law under which foreign broadcast can be suspended within the period of 3 months before national elections. Latvia just administratively stopped all Russian government TV broadcast on its territory. Our own Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty is investigated now because of suspicions that it was probably infiltrated by Central Asian governments, and our radio station provided information which was favorable to these governments. What can be done in this situation? Is there a borderline between freedom of speech and propaganda? Thank you.
Just going to roll it back to the topic of the day, and that's the constitutional protections of free speech and a free press. What you're talking about, in my mind, I mean, fake news, fake press is not a new term in the last 4 years. It's getting more mileage, but it's not a new term. It's been around for a very long time, and it's been, to a certain extent, taken to an art level or an art form by some foreign governments over the past decades, whether it's in Germany, whether it's in Russia, whether it's in to control the press. And so I don't consider that a free press. If it's government-sanctioned, government-sponsored, government-run propaganda, then it's government-run propaganda. That is the antithesis of a free speech and a free press situation. So, you know, you've got to deal with that, and you've got to deal with where's the source of the news, where is it coming from? And there's it's not a new thing. There's been some very sophisticated propaganda machines throughout history. We have to figure out a way to break through that and say what is right, what is fact, and how do we act accordingly? And it's hard work. You know, this democracy thing, this free speech thing, this constitutional rights stuff, this is hard work. It's not for it's graduate level civics, you know, every day. And we need to buckle up and buckle down and do our jobs too, as people, not just lawyers, but as citizens of this country, or people that have come here to get the freedoms we have. Everybody's got to fight for those every day. And turning off propaganda is the best way to do it.
Anyone else? I'm looking.
Oh, sorry. Thanks.
Over here.
Is eroding public confidence in the First Amendment a bellwether for the next generation legal decisions on the First Amendment?
You're going to have to give me that one again. I lost
Yeah, I
something.
didn't quite
Sorry.
hear it.
Closer. Okay. Is eroding public confidence in the First Amendment a bellwether for the next generation of legal decisions on the First Amendment?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that. From a standpoint, hopefully we can work, programs like this can work to get the public confidence back in the press, but whether or not there's going to be a change, decisional change from basically all the way to the Supreme Court on free speech, free press, if that's what your question is, I don't know. I mean, I think in my mind, most of the court is pretty protective of, at least at this point, of free speech, free press, that right, that fundamental right. And there are limits, obviously, and I don't know that anything that's going on now is really a bellwether or like is going to suggest that the court's going to move away from protection or move to more restrictions. It'd be interesting to see, but I'm not sure I can answer it as an expert because that's technically it's not my field of law, but also I'm not sure the two are an equal equation. So.
Great.
So a couple of years ago, there was a gentleman named Richard Spencer who rented space from the University of Florida. He's a white nationalist, and so the University of Florida, of course, provides a forum for organizations to rent space for their events. And so the University of Florida, under the First Amendment, had no choice but to allow this guy to come and give his speech. And of course, a lot of people were upset by it, and so there were a lot of protests. At the end of the day, it cost the University of Florida around $600,000 to provide for the various security, state, local police forces, and security and whatnot. The president of the University of Florida suggested that it might be appropriate for the federal government to provide for perhaps a fund could be created for what amounted to basically an unfunded federal mandate to state institutions to spend money on security to provide for venues for speech like this. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts.
So here's where I'm going to draw a line. And it was a good question, and I might have some individual thoughts about it. And today I think I've kept my individual thoughts at bay and stayed within the four corners of the policies of the American Bar Association. And because the chief policy officer for the American Bar Association is sitting in the audience, I'm going to say I'm pretty sure we don't have policy in the association on that, and as the spokesperson for the association, I can't comment. Sorry. I know it's not the answer you wanted, but there are certain restrictions that I have to live under, and I'm going to do my job.
There's someone here.
Given that opinion and conflict sells in the news media and facts don't, what would you recommend as a potential starting point to regain confidence in the media when right now it seems like everybody who watches the news is just angry?
Well, I think from the public standpoint, they get to decide what it is that they watch and what it is that they want to see and what it is that's going to move them. And it's their right to watch really pretty much whatever they want in terms of the news media and decide their own mind. But if there's enough people that want facts back, that say facts matter, yes, we do want opinions. We want educated people to provide us some, information, some assistance, and listen to both sides on how they explain the facts or how the facts matter. Then essentially you vote by, turning the TV off or turning the radio off or turning Facebook off or whatever the source is. The sponsors will get the message. And then and if the message is delivered that, listen, we want more facts in our news, so we can make informed decisions. That might take some time, but I think that's the way to deliver it. It is an individual or collective group of people that can take that action. But certain things, you're right, certain things do, there's more bad news on TV than there is good because that gets people's attention. So sometimes we need to have our attention, if there's a storm coming, and we need to be aware that there's a storm coming. But I think you collectively as citizens, you figure that out and make sure that when you decide what you watch or what you want to watch, that you make it known that you want facts. You're smart enough, capable enough to make your own mind up, and you'll turn to the editorial page or the editorial part of the review TV program if you want to listen to somebody else's opinion.
Here we go. Right up front.
Just to follow up on that question, we seem to be living in a time now where a lot of people are not very interested. This is sort of what the gentleman before you said, not very interested in the facts, and a substantial minority of people at least. And if our society moves in a direction where that substantial minority becomes the majority, what does that have as an how does that provide us a positive way to move forward?
Well, that's a pretty gloomy picture for one. I think, I don't think it's happened yet. And I think there's hope. There's programs, Law Day programs being done all over the country. And it shouldn't just be for one day. I mean, civics has to return to our middle schools and our high schools and has to be taught as robustly as any other subject. And we need to try to figure out a way to educate the next generation of students that these rights, a lot of people risked a lot to get us here. And we are not doing a very good job. If we don't pay attention, if we don't protect them, we are not doing a very good job of honoring their memories. And I think we, as leaders, have to figure out a way to get that message across, that facts matter, that facts and data should be driving their decisions on what they do, and that, which still I think is the vast majority of people that have that feeling, they need to make their voices known. It can't be drowned out by a minority of voices on either side of the political spectrum. The group in the middle that wants the facts, that wants to collaborate and cooperate and compromise, they need to not be silent. The silent majority needs to speak out on issues like this with respect to the importance of these basic fundamental rights to the survival of this country.
Here we go.
Were you a school teacher before you did this?
No.
So glaring at these
No.
people there. No,
No.
I'm just.
Following up a little bit on your remarks about the need for ordinary citizens and consumers of the news to kind of vote with their feet or vote with their attention if they're trying to perhaps hold the press to a higher factual standard, would you see much likelihood of any legislation or regulation in the near term that would provide for a certain amount of protection for individual speech on social media platforms? For example, if I were to try to, say, express displeasure with Facebook about something I saw there, and I didn't feel like it was enough for me to just individually boycott it, could I use a Facebook post to broadcast the need for a boycott of Facebook on Facebook itself and be protected in expressing that view, or should the company have the right to shut down that type of speech?
Wow. So it would be interesting to see what Facebook would do in that situation. I mean, contractually, I don't know if the terms and conditions, I think they can pretty much shut down whoever they want that's using their platform, because it is a private contract right that you sign on. I don't know that legislating somebody's right to do that, which means restrictions of Facebook, necessarily solve the problem. Although I'm not sure, and I'm not, like I said at the start of this, I'm not a First Amendment lawyer per se. I'm not sure that Facebook is, it encourages people to speak out, encourages people to tell us what's going on, literally everything that's going on in their lives. It encourages that platform, but are they part of the news media? I'm not sure that it, as a company, is a news company. They provide a platform for people to express views. They provide, and certainly some of the things that they do as a private company have ramifications. Whether there's been testimony in Congress, whether that's going to result in anything, it's hard to say. One of the beauties of a free internet is it's a free internet. One of the downfalls of the free internet is it's a free internet. You get what you get, and sometimes you get what you pay for. We need an open, robust discussion point. We need to be able to find information, but we also need to act responsibly. And since they're in the private sector and not really what I would consider as press, there are ramifications, I would think, about that. How far it would go, it's going to be up to Congress to make, and the courts to make those decisions. But you as a person who says, I don't agree with you posting this, and you post that on Facebook, I mean, I would think as long as you're doing it in an appropriate fashion, they would, let's see what they do. It depends on how many followers you have, I guess, right? And how many likes that code gets. So, but as far as legislating that into it, that'll be interesting to see. I don't have an answer for that one.
Okay. Well, I think at this point we can wrap up. I would like to take this opportunity to thank and acknowledge the 2019 Law Day Chair, Lucian T. Petta, a partner with Adams and Reese, LLP in Memphis, Tennessee, for his very valuable insights and commitment working on the First Amendment law-related theme. Another thanks to the American Bar Association Division for Public Education staff for their dedication and tireless efforts in producing a wealth of free resources on free speech, free press, free society. Also, I would like everyone here to watching to follow the Law Library of Congress on our social media and subscribe to our email alerts. Here's my advertisement at loc.gov/subscribe so you can keep up with our news and events. And also, if you have some time, please visit the collection items display in the next room. Our curators from the Law Library of Congress and the Serial and Government Documents Division are happy to provide explanations and answer your questions. Bob, once again, thank you for being with us today, and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, Jay. Appreciate it.